Peace, everyone. It's Black Eyed Priestess. I just thought I would go live. I got another question, and I just thought I would go live and answer it while I'm making my matcha latte. It's getting cold out there. I'm probably going to stay in for the next couple days. My classes got canceled because Wednesday it's going to be like 15 below. So just going to make myself comfortable, and I figured I'd just do a spontaneous upload because I took some notes, but I had a little energy to talk about the issue. So the question was on my Papa Legba Mysteries upload on YouTube, and a brother asked, how do you know if you have bloodline traits? So first and foremost, I want to refer to bloodline traits of Vodun. Vodun is an oral tradition, and it is a bloodline trait, just like things in the craft tend to be more about bloodline traits than when it comes to excelling as a mage, so to speak, or a witch. It can be more about the natural bloodline traits you have that make you inclined towards certain crafts. So in terms of Vodun, I wanted to say first and foremost, well, I'll go ahead and pull a scripture, I guess. I did want to pull a scripture. Peace, CPT54. Good evening. All right. I pulled Proverbs 22. I get this scripture a lot. Proverbs 22, verses 20. It's verse 19 and 20. Verse 20 says, here I have written out for you 30 sayings full of knowledge and wise advice. 19 says, I would have you trust in the Lord, and so I make these things known to you now. So that's the scripture. I just wanted to do that, first and foremost. So I will say this. In terms of Vodun, Papa Legba, the ancestor Papa Legba, will approach you. It could be in the form of Ilegwa, Eshu Ilegbara. It could be several, in the form of several different paths. But eventually you will get Papa Legba, that path of Papa Legba, that masculine path of Papa Legba will approach you and initiate you. This could be in the physical. A person could show up and who is hosting that Papa Legba spirit in your life, or it could be in the astral. You know what I'm saying? Could be through dreams, through astral experiences you may have if you astral project or things like that. But in Vodun, when it comes to, so to speak, initiation of those of the bloodline, you will deal with Papa Legba in some way, shape, or form. Vodun is the left-hand path of the Most High, so to speak. You have the right-hand throne, which is Christ, and that represents the red sun, and righteousness. And you have the left-hand path, which is the mysteries of Vodun, which represent, Papa Legba, the black sun, dealing with ancestral powers. And then you have the straight and narrow, which the Bible, so to speak, encourages a person to walk the straight and narrow, which is believing in that Christ is your savior, believing in that blood sacrifice of the sun, of the red sun, for our salvation, but also being aware of your relationship to the Most High through spirituality, being able to recognize that the Most High still works in mysterious ways. All right. So that mystery, when you're being initiated, you will receive Papa Legba somehow, and Papa Legba and Yemaya together will show up to you. And that may be at a point where you're receiving a new name, or receiving, so to speak, a title, a spiritual title. A lot of Black people think it's about being African, but a lot of times when you're changing your name because you a lot of times paid for an initiation, it's not to make a Black American feel that they are now African somehow. It's receiving a name that represents your spirit and your responsibility for knowing, having that esoteric knowledge of self. So when it comes to initiations and bloodline traits, you will receive Papa Legba and Yemaya, and depending on whether or not you have a responsibility within Vodun, within that heritage, you may receive a new name. It's important to understand that if you have the bloodline trait, you don't need to pay for initiation. People who pay for initiation, as opposed to making an offering or a sacrifice to somebody who showed up in your life to kind of guide you. When you go and you pay for initiation, that is something that anyone can do. Anyone could take classes and get certified. Anyone can go to a class, pay for that class, and themselves get certified. Vodun is not a certification tradition. It's an oral tradition. So again, in terms of the bloodline traits, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And that is what I'm saying. When you have a bloodline trait as opposed to just an interest or a religious society that you're a part of. When you have the bloodline trait, the teacher or messenger who is meant to activate you will show up to your life. You won't have to go seek someone out to seek out. That's essentially establishing your own righteousness. When you have bloodline traits, those things will show up in your life. Now, whether you receive them or not and recognize them or not, that is up to the individual. So I did take some notes here. So I really wanted to reiterate that you'll gain. Vodun is an oral tradition and it's a bloodline trait. So you will gain mysteries through practicing, and you'll gain understanding through listening, because it's an oral tradition. And listening doesn't just mean listening to a teacher. It could be listening to the spirit realm, listening to your intuition a lot of times. So that's how you will gain mysteries, not through reading, not through teaching, not through just believing, not through paying for initiations. You gain mysteries through listening to the spirit realm, allowing yourself to be guided by the spirit realm, and actively practicing those supernatural traits that you're inspired to develop, typically on a regular basis somehow. So that kind of segues into something else that I wanted to talk about. Aside from Vodun, how do you know that you have a bloodline trait of the craft, essentially? So I wanted to talk about alchemet, dealing with all chemistry and the etymology of ancient Kemet, dealing with the Black land, dealing with the Kushite Black people that came from ancient Kemet, formerly known as Egypt, which still in Greek translates to Black land, speaks to the blackness the wealth there, but mostly the blackness of the people who generated the wealth. And that deals with the chemistry of blackness as well, the dominant genetic. Our genetics are a form of chemistry that allows us to wield certain energies on this terrain that was designed for Aboriginal humans, so to speak, to flourish. Now, again, I don't want to say that the recessive genetic doesn't serve its purpose or isn't welcome. It's just to talk about blackness and the black land and that mystery of chemistry, to talk about in general, not just Vodun, which is not only necessarily something that you have to be dark skinned to practice. Neither are other traits of the craft. So other traits of the craft will be, essentially, how do you know if you're a mage or a witch? Mage typically being masculine or general, and witch typically being feminine. It could be general too. But a mage and a witch is essentially the masculine and feminine principles of the craft. And having bloodline traits of the craft starts with how much you excel at academia and scholastics, because those things were originally used to initiate students into the craft and to be able to gauge their adeptness at magic and witchcraft. So chemistry is one of those things that relates to the black genetic, but basically chemistry is used in cooking. That's something that witches do. That's something that can test your ability as a witch. Can you cook? Can you cook to heal? And it goes into other things like knowing botany, knowing about poisons, knowing about different substances. But, that's an example. Another example is mathematics. Mathematics can test your adeptness at numerology, which is something in the craft. So all these things that we learn in school originally were meant to meant to determine whether or not a student was gifted as a mage or a witch. Science can deal with biology, which gets into physical biology, and that would get into witchcraft. But science also would be a precursor to astrophysics, which deals with quantum physics. Astrophysics, understanding space, and then that gets into quantum physics, understanding time. These are different dimensions. So science is a precursor to understanding how to deal with dimensions. That's a masculine principle of magic within the craft. And when you're talking about astrophysics and quantum physics, that is getting into your ability to astral project or be a time lord. Again, masculine principles. Anything with projection and intellect is what I call man magic. It's a masculine principle. It doesn't mean that a woman can't do it. But there are mysteries to that, and I don't want to get too much off subject. But there's a reason that a man's vocal cords can go lower than a woman's and as high as a woman's, but a woman's vocal cords cannot naturally go as low as a man's. A woman's voice is designed for the woman that is created as the weaker vessel to be able to inspire a man with our voice. A woman needs to be able to scream at a high pitch rate, at a high pitch frequency, because that high pitch frequency is actually designed to cause a man to react with a protective energy. It's designed to alert a man that there is danger. These are things that modern society has lost, that if you have bloodline traits, you will naturally kind of understand. and be led into mysteries, what are now essentially mysteries. Some things became mysteries because of New Age. Some things always were mysteries, which is why Vodun is an oral tradition. So furthermore, science is a precursor to metaphysics. Metaphysics deals with essentially taking the physical realm and being able to experience supernatural things from the physical realm. That's witchcraft. That's being able to take something like what I'm doing, making a matcha latte, but maybe I can offer it to someone, and because I have a trait of witchcraft, I can heal that person of something because the physical properties of vanilla, clove, cinnamon will not only have physical benefits, but the physical benefits will actually create the spiritual benefits as well. That's what holistic healing is, and that's why holistic healing is associated with witchcraft, because essentially the holistic aspect does deal with metaphysics. It deals with taking physical properties that are scientific and creating a spiritual or supernatural result that parallels the physical properties and results of, drinking ginger, so to speak, clove, things like that. So that's witchcraft. Again, that's metaphysics, that's science. Are you as a student able to make associations with the things that you learn in school, which the school system, unless you're going to private school, is essentially meant to dumb you down and make you a corporate slave and make you conform to social programming. It's meant to hypnotize you the way TV programming is. What else did I have here? Math is a precursor to numerology. Numerology also gets into language, because numerology, math essentially, math and literature, math and language, those things combined deal with interpretation. And that is a precursor to divination. The ability to interpret signs and symbols which deal with language. Math is the ability to interpret numbers. Again, math and science can go together too to create metaphysics, astrophysics, quantum physics. So these are how all of these things you learn in school relate to bloodline traits that help you understand the mysteries of the surface academia that you're taught at, at a young age. Geometry, I always say cooking, chemistry deals with cooking. Chemistry also relates to math, and math is a precursor to chemistry and physics. Chemistry is using physics and math to create equations. So cooking, chemistry, cooking is a form of creating equations, but chemistry also deals with formulas. If you're able to create formulas and make them balance out, you're able to cast spells. If you are adept at chemistry, adept at math, and adept at language, because casting spells isn't just about balancing a formula. Casting spells also deals with the ability to rhyme. That deals with rhythm. That gets into music, and that also gets into language, understanding etymology and making things line up, making words that sound the same and have similar meanings, or that can create a beat, which puts a wavelength into the ether to manifest something when you rhyme, when you cast a spell with rhyme. Again, some of these things, I'm giving away some mysteries, but again, I was comfortable. I'm just kind of winging it here. I just made some notes, so I said, let me do an upload, see what happens. So I went on Instagram. And then language deals with interpretation, phonetics, dealing with phonology and phonetics, dealing with your ability to rhyme and create rhythm, but also create art, which is music. That deals with language and math too. Language overall in general deals with communications. So communications will lead into another way that you can determine whether you have bloodline traits. How do you communicate or interact with the animal kingdom? And with nature in general. Remember, when we're talking about chemistry and astrophysics and things like that, we're also talking about how do you relate to nature. As a witch, how do you relate to the elements that you use in creating spells and potions and things like that? Do you have a relationship with nature? Do you have a relationship with the trees? Do you have a relationship with the animals? How do you relate to animals? How do animals receive you? How do they perceive you? Are you able to communicate with animals in a amicable way, in a benevolent way? Do you have a fear of animals? Do they fear you? These things will speak to your bloodline traits. Being a beastmaster would be under the house of Ochosi in Vodun. And that is very symbolic as a mage or a witch, because one of the main things that a mage or a witch has is an animal familiar. Some have spirit familiars, where they have a familiar entity. And that is when you're kind of getting into, for example, tarot divination. Some are able to do things like interpreting and divination through tarot, which is under an understanding of numerology. Tarot is an understanding of numerology. Being able to read different tarot cards and tarot decks, that determines your ability as a mage or a witch to understand numerology and language, which means signs and symbols and interpretation. But there are some people who have a familiar spirit that allows them to know things about other people, or that allows them to know things in general. All right. My phone's about to die and my latte's almost ready. I wanted to do a couple more things here, though. I wanted to throw a peppermint in here. I think I got everything else. Nutmeg, allspice. I put the vanilla in. I gotta make my chalice. So, and then in terms of crafts, again, the number one way you'll know, and I forgot to mention this, but like I said, I might have to do this upload again anyway. Another way you will know is okay, let's go. What about your parents? What supernatural traits or gifts do your parents have that you also have? Supernatural. What things are your parents able to do or accomplish, or what supernatural traits do they have that you also have? My father has an uncanny psychic ability. I have that too. And a high empath. Some people are high empaths to the point where it affects our livelihood, to the point where we can't interact in public or be in public to the same capacity that the average human can, because we are able to, we're very sensitive to energies and auras, and vibrations. You know, high empath could be one. You know, maybe someone in your family is a Reiki healer, and they're able to work with energy that way. Okay, so it's not always about what profession they're doing, but that's an example of someone who may have taken a supernatural trait and made a profession out of it. All right, you know, there may be things that happen in your home, in the privacy of your home, where you know that does your father turn into a werewolf when it's a full moon? And so you may laugh, but I'm being serious. These are ways you know if you have a bloodline trait. You know, people have these experiences and these lifestyles. So for the most part, the main thing is, one, if you have to ask, typically you don't. Some things are known and understood, and certain things, if certain questions, if you have to ask, then it's not in you, it's outside of you. But when something is in you and it's in your blood, there's certain questions and things. I don't want to say there's certain questions you don't ask, but there essentially are. Actually, I looked up a scripture from another upload to take notes, and I looked up some other notes that I recently had on that same sheet of paper, and it was about when I did about the casting ballots. And 2 Timothy 2:22 was a scripture that came up when it mentioned unlearned. Apostle Paul was talking about people who ask unlearned and foolish questions. And I don't want to say that this question was a foolish one. If it was, I wouldn't do a whole upload about it. But I want people to understand. I want to genuinely answer the question: how do you know if you have bloodline traits? One, you won't have to ask. You won't constantly be searching outside of yourself, and that includes reading a library's worth of books. You don't need to read it, and reading those books takes the same amount of time and energy that practicing a ritual does. But if you have that bloodline trait that inspires you to have an altar, have a shrine, to practice rituals, to go out in nature and do the things that witches and mages do that we don't talk about because we do them and we understand them, then you don't have that trait. You have an interest in it. But when you have that trait, you are living that life. You're not reading about it. You're reading from people who are about it. Some of them, and again, I'm not saying don't do research, but this is how you know you have a bloodline trait. And essentially that's what the craft is. And that's what Vodun is. It's bloodline traits. Now, again, there are religious aspects of it. The religious aspect of being a mage or a witch is called Wicca. It's a new age religion that is about honoring solstices and honoring, certain holy days, no different than Christianity. It's a religion. But most of those people don't have bloodline traits that give them a responsibility for their intrinsic power. Coming together and worshiping the moon is different than having a relationship with the moon because you have a gift and have a bloodline trait. That you have a relationship with these things. And I would venture to say that you honor the Most High, but there's plenty of people who have bloodline traits that don't relate to honoring the Most High, and they still have bloodline traits, and they can still accomplish things within witchcraft and magic. But you don't seek answers outside of yourself as often as you do finding ways to search within. And I don't want to confuse what I'm saying with new age practices that people do now. Everything is about going within and meditating and doing yoga and everything. I don't want people to confuse practicing something that's new age with having a bloodline trait. What I'm saying is there's just certain things that you know naturally and things that you just do. You don't follow new age trends. You may have been actively practicing what may now be a new age trend since you were young, since as long as you can remember. Another thing I have here is how advanced are you at crafts? Masculine principles of crafts would be technology. Feminine principles of crafts would be making things designed toward health. using food, using things in nature that are used to keep you healthy, you know, and for healing. So again, these are masculine and feminine principles, but how good are you at crafts? Have you ever made a witch ball? You know, have you made one? Have you been able to take sticks and take things from nature and make a witch ball, which is essentially wood bending? You know, you know, have you bent an element before? What element or elements or sub-elements have you bent, or have you, you know, developed a relationship where you can bend it to your will? You know, with magic too, not doing magic tricks, but that would be one of them. That would be a precursor, but not just doing magic tricks, but have you actually used hypnosis or mind manipulation to get people or a group of people to bend to your will? Have you been able to hypnotize a group of people through something that you said or suggested, or through saying something, or creating a spectacle or an illusion? You know, and again, when we're talking about modernity, we're talking about people watching TV. The TV is a tool of magic that hypnotizes people. But you as an individual, are you able to do what the TV has done to most of America and a lot of other places in the world that consume TV? You know what I'm saying? TV programs. They're called programs because they program you. Just had to heat my latte up. Let me get my chalice ready. So I hope these things are making sense. But in terms of crafts, so they call it arts and crafts for a reason, because there's the art aspect to it, which is creative, but there's the craft aspect to it, which is being an artisan. You know what I'm saying? Being an artisan. Are you a craftsman or a craftswoman? Are you an artisan? Have you taken something, a mundane art or skill? And that's what they originally, it should be called arts and skills, because crafts is related to being a mage or a witch. But what they refer to crafts now is a learned skill, a labor skill. They use that word craft, but the root word to craft is witch. Okay, don't forget that. So when you're talking about arts and skills, do you have a craft that comes from it within the arts or within skilled trades that you make your own, or that you can do better, so better that you can have your own brand, because you are able to take a craft or you're able to take a skill or an art and be crafty with it, you know. That gets into the Aj and the Ajogun within Vodun. But, you know, I want to try and keep this focused, because I can go all over the place with this subject. And that's why I like that you guys ask questions, because it gives me topics to talk about instead of just ranting about my sentiments on any given situation, you know. With arts, they could be visual, performing, written or oral. Literary arts can be written or oral. It could be poetry. Are you a natural artist who can perform and express the supernatural? Does your artwork is it above and beyond, so to speak, in a way where you're expressing something supernatural? Again, when you're talking about language and your geometry is another thing I missed that you learn. Learning geometry in school is a precursor to drawing veves. Geometry deals with your ability to recognize and create symmetry and proportion through artwork, through penmanship, you know, and in other ways, not just 2D, but in 3D ways. And that goes into the other dimensions. Can you create symmetry? That's what geometry is. Can you create symmetry and proportion? And remember, the scientific definition of beauty is symmetry and proportion. The social definition of beauty is it's in the eye of the beholder, which I definitely agree with. But there's a scientific, which is essentially a witchcraft definition of beauty, which is symmetry and proportion. It's not just that someone considers you beautiful. It is your features are symmetrical and proportionate, so as that you are crafted with a supernatural trait of beauty. You know, and beauty, beauty is a precursor to being an enchantress. There's ways that you know, I want people to understand that being a witch and being a mage is a lot more practical than people want to believe. And especially one thing I want to say, in the Black community, we have something called the conscious community, where, you know, mostly Black men, they get on their soapbox and they talk, and then they demonize the Bible and say that the Bible was given to us by white people, and the Bible enslaved our race, and it's so evil, and it's wrong and it's false. But on the other hand, so again, we're talking about the left hand and the right hand, and we're talking about the conscious community, especially the men on their soapboxes. They demonize the Bible and say that it came from white people, but then they also demonize witchcraft. Say that came from white people too. And that's an attempt to stay on the straight and narrow, but a lot of things in the conscious community show how ignorant a lot of Black people are when it comes to bloodline traits. Because the left-hand path of Vodun is a bloodline trait relative to the dominant genetic. And that gets into the being of the genetics of Sirius B and the Dogons. All right. And again, talking about ancient Kemet and the migration of the Dogons and the things that they accomplished. But it doesn't, again, that's that bloodline trait of Papa Legba being on the left-hand path. But the Bible is not just something that you have to believe. The Bible is historical. So that right-hand path too, there's a bloodline trait as well to being on the right-hand path. And that is dealing with a Vodun tradition of blood sacrifices that comes from the Bible. And that is being covered with the blood of Christ. And in the right-hand path, being covered with the blood of Christ, not the left-hand path of making a burnt offering or an animal sacrifice or a blood sacrifice to appease the spirit realm and get what you need, or to receive blessings, but to be covered with the blood of Christ through believing that the Most High, who created us all, essentially created all things, that the Most High gave his, only begotten Son, but here I'm going to say the red Son, the righteous. You have the sacrifice, you have the lamb and the scapegoat, you have the sacrifice and the scapegoat, you got the right hand path and left hand path. Left hand path, you got people making blood sacrifices, which I don't condone. Again, if you really have a bloodline trait, your blood is the sacrifice. And that's another thing I want to reiterate. But again, like I said, the right hand path is being covered with the blood of Christ through belief, not through making the sacrifices that the Old Testament Hebrews, the Vodun that they were doing, which is biblical, but it's that bloodline trait too. But remember this, and this is something I'm going to end with because my phone is dying, and this is the most important. The bloodline trait means that your blood has value. Your blood has supernatural value. And I'm not relating you to being a martyr and saying that your blood has the same value as Christ's blood to wipe away all sins. What I'm saying is that when you make blood sacrifices in Vodun and in the craft, you are drawing your own blood. Real mages and witches draw our own blood. We don't have to go slaughter an innocent. You sacrifice your blood. That is another reason why people, again, if you're honoring certain spirits and entities, they may convince you and manipulate you to sacrifice your blood relatives. But a mage or a witch, we sacrifice our blood to make a covenant or make a pact or to make a bond with the spirit realm and to receive. You sacrifice your blood. You cut yourself. That is why you have a lot of people who get tattoos. This is not to signify being a mage or a witch. Getting tattoos is mostly about allowing yourself to be branded by a certain entity and becoming enslaved to that entity. That's something that's new age. The act of artwork on your skin is ancient. It is ancient initiations. It's ancient artwork. It's craft. But it had more symbolism with the role that you played in your tribe. And, again, some of it's general artwork. But like I said, a lot of times when you really get initiated and activated spiritually, Legba and Yemaya will endow you with a name that holds responsibility. It's not to take away the name that you were born with, because your parents are inspired spiritually to name you anyway. But it's that you will be endowed with the responsibility that you have. And that's what being initiated is about. It's not about being able to say that you have something that you don't. Again, if you really had the bloodline traits, you wouldn't seek initiation. You would be activated. But when you gotta charge my phone, when you really have the bloodline traits, you will receive a name which gives you a responsibility. And that is what receiving ashe or initiation is. You already have the power you're born with in the bloodline trait. But when you receive another name, you should understand that you're receiving a responsibility for the power and the mysteries that you have been endowed with. And a lot of people are going around paying for this. And I've always said, as Black High Priestess, that is the number one thing. That is essentially kind of the whole foundation of, my ministry as Black High Priestess. Paying for initiations is one of the number one way that you know that you don't really have it. And I'm not talking about you making an offering to somebody who is doing spiritual work for you. I'm not talking about paying and using sacred economics for someone who has done you a service. I'm saying that if you need to constantly seek outside of yourself these things, it's probably because it's not in your blood. There are just certain things that are in your blood. That's the difference between getting certified for a skill and having the natural talent to do it. And that's when I was getting into saying, performing arts and things like that. Do you excel at art, better than the people who are certified at it? When you go to school, do you know more than your teachers? Are you smarter than your teachers? Have you excelled beyond, and I don't want to say masters, because a master is different than a teacher in a lot of ways. One, it speaks to indentured servitude, but it also speaks to a person who has mastered, not just gotten certified, but a person who is considered a master because they didn't get certified. They showed and they proved time and time again. But this is what I'm saying. When the student is ready, the master will appear. You know what I'm saying? But if you're constantly seeking outside of yourself certain things, it's not within you. Again, it's not to confuse people, and to say that if you are interested in classes and something, and it's not to say that you should just be born knowing how to do certain things. But when it comes to supernatural, you're talking about the things that I mentioned, all the academic scholastic subjects, how they relate to metaphysical supernatural traits that you may have, and how you can recognize, whether you have those traits. What have you done? What have you achieved? What have you accomplished? I talked about the blood bending, and I talked about the water bending, wood bending, bending the elements. What healing have you accomplished? Have you healed someone? Have you cursed someone before? Have you gotten angry and created a form of destruction that came because your temper changed? Peace, Tanya. Have you you or your parents, what supernatural thing are you able to read people's minds? Are you able to heal people through touching? Are you able to bend certain elements? Are you exceptionally skilled in an uncanny way at at mundane things? Think about the things that you yourself have actually done and achieved supernaturally. And, and the last thing I wanted to mention is, how do people interact with you? A lot of times, people say, oh, well, wearing black represents being a witch or a mage. It can, but it more so represents an aspect of being a witch or a mage, which is being an empath, being a high empath. When you're a high empath, black is a color that protects us and blocks out all of the wavelengths and vibrations and auras that we can clearly feel and experience, so we can essentially function in human society. Black wearing black is symbolic of a particular trait of mages or witches, not being one in general. There are several people who like the color black who have no bloodline traits and who will be spooked out if they experience supernatural things. So, like I was saying, in the black community, you got to be careful for the conscious community, because a lot of people out here, they're learned and they're studious, but they want to demonize the Bible, but then also demonize magic and witchcraft, and essentially leave black people with no real power except idolatry. Let's worship ancestors. Let's idolize ancestors, idolize ancient Kemet, idolize all these things. That's kind of what happens in the black community. Let's take away the Bible, which is essential. Let's take away bloodline traits, because that spooks us out. And really, black people don't like to see other black people in power. That's the effect of slavery. Black people hating ourselves. And self-hatred does not always mean you as an individual hate who you are. More often than not, black self-hatred is expressed in the way black people, dark-skinned black people, treat other dark-skinned black people. A lot of times and I say dark-skinned because nowadays black people don't know what it means to be black. And anyone can be black, including all these white women that these black men have ushered into the community to oppress the black women who have done all the work and had these brothers' backs just to be abandoned for the wave of white Latino women. See, a black man will say that a woman is black when she's clearly white, but negate the fact that there are actual black women from Iran. There are actual black women from South America. There are actual black women in India. There are actual black women. But because you have a light-skinned white woman and you don't want to admit that you hate your race and you hate yourself, you say, well, she's got one drop of black blood, so she's black. No, there are actual black women in foreign nations. And you can tell because they're black. So I don't want to talk about race and genetics, but I just want to, again, talking about the black community, when it comes to self-hatred, a lot of times that's how we treat each other and how we react to other black people who are not marginalized by slave syndromes. How easily we hate and sometimes even want to sabotage other black people who have something to offer because we have a token mindset of being that one house Negro. But the one house Negro never wants to see all of the slaves on the plantation take over the house. They want to be the white person's pet. And we got to get out of that. And that's a lot of times what you get when you deal with the left-hand path. Black people talking about the left-hand path, but they're talking about idolatry. When you really do create supernatural things, you're going to be feared by your own people who claim that the Bible is evil, but then want to demonize you because you're a witch. That's how backwards a lot of black people have become. So I just wanted to speak about that. Most of the black community has no power because they're too busy worshiping idols of stone, things that they read in books. But when you actually can put the knowledge to practice, those same black people who don't believe in the Bible are going to demonize you too because you able to put it to practice and they still stuck on stupid because they just learned how to read and are taking too much pride in knowing how to read and ain't accomplished any supernatural feat. Yet the things in the Bible, the Hebrew Israelites was doing supernatural things that mages and witches can do to this day. So just stay away from New Age. Stay away from the New Age. All right, if no one has any other questions, I'm going to wrap this up. And I hope this helps. And like I said, let me know if anyone does have any questions. And if you don't make a donation, then I'll do a live feed on it to help others. If you want a private reading to know personal things that you may not want live, then make a donation. Remember, you'll get free oracle counseling with any product that you purchase. So keep that in mind. All right. Peace and love.